preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
I think there had to be assurance that there would be, at least at the outset, a few elements of the media that would be cooperative from the beginning, because they had to start off with a certain momentum from the beginning before reality started to interfere with the building of the illusion.
His head could be seen to move violently forward.
An element of the Central Intelligence Agency of our country killed John Kennedy.
You know Oswald did it. He did it.
Is he serious?
On November 22nd, 1963, not only did John Kennedy die, it's also the day America's free press died. They became proven aiders, abettors, and protectors of the known murderers of President John F. Kennedy. Learn why, when, and how our media became corrupted in the most important American movie since JFK, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, a movie you will never forget.
I welcome this kind of examination.
We came?
And for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
A new world order. New world order.
We saw?
If suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe.
Always talk to you like they're the law.
And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
He died. He died.
But that's a wicked woman.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
You can keep it. Period. 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 They are the focus of evil in the modern world. It's a catastrophe.
Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome.
This is the Midnight Rider News Podcast. Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm St. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, court historians, and textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight we have episode 010, The World of John Barbour. John and I will be discussing his new documentary, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It can be purchased, rented, and watched on Amazon.com, and we'll have a link to it on MidnightRiderNews.com. First, however, we're going to talk to Midnight Rider News' own Brian Lloyd. So, Brian, how are things in the alt history world?
There's been several events here in the D.C. area. For example, we had on June 3rd out at Dulles Airport, a hotel near Dulles Airport, they held a conference called the National Security State in JFK. And it was held by the Future of Freedom Foundation. Their website is fff.org. Couldn't be any easier to remember, 3fs.org. So they threw the event, and they had a number of guests. And the speakers was a fantastic lineup, and we really heard some great stuff. I was blessed to sit at the table with Ray McGovern, former CIA. He's been a good, quote, good guy for some time. We sat in the back, and we had speakers such as Jeffrey Sachs, Michael Glennon, Stephen Kinzer. Doug Horn gave a fantastic speech. It was fantastic. Michael Swanson, Peter Janney was there to talk about his book and his the latest comings and goings in his investigation of what happened to Mary Meyer, murdered recently after John F. Kennedy was murdered. He was her part-time mistress, and someone appears to have feared perhaps bedroom talk became dangerous because she was known and outspoken. She was also the husband of Cord Meyer, who was pretty high-level CIA, and I'm not so sure it's smart to do that with a top CIA guy. But nonetheless, Dr. Peter Janney was there. Jefferson Morley gave a great speech. We had Ron Paul speak, and really the conference was called the National Security State in JFK. And so we were all waiting for Ron Paul to talk about, what do you think happened in the Kennedy case? And he quite frankly didn't really address that question head on. What he did was sort of give, I wouldn't say a campaign speech because he's not really running for anything, but just really like hit all the Ron Paul points that we all know and love him for. Banking is bad, this and that. But he made everyone laugh at times. But he really didn't address the JFK question like we would have liked. Nonetheless, it was still a great speech. Jacob Hornberger, who is part of the Future of Freedom Foundation, gave a fantastic speech in the afternoon, and it was concluded by sort of a sit-down with Jim Eugenio and Oliver Stone. And so Oliver Stone spoke for briefly, but then he let Jim do a lot of the talking, and then there was a question and answer period, which kind of brief. It could have been longer. It would have been nice. But that's also available. That was shown on C-SPAN 3, and that's been on TV before. I've seen it on TV since the event, and I don't know how much they rerun that kind of thing. But if one wanted to, see this, very fantastic speeches by a lot of these guys, you would probably just go to the Future of Freedom Foundation's website, fff.org. You could probably learn all you need, get copies of it. They have copies available, I know, of the event.
So you've attended a few interesting speeches at the National Press Club.
Well, we had an interesting visitor to the National Press Club. That was on July 19th. William Pepper, the attorney, he had an evening dinner with a small speech and questions and answers. Most people know, or some people know, or for those who don't know, William Pepper is an attorney, graduated from Ivy League. He's a barrister in Britain. He's well known as the defender of James Earl Ray. He didn't defend him at trial, but he defended the King family with the King family's support. He has fought for Sirhan Sirhan as well. And in 1999, for example, there was a civil case which was investigated and sought out who the killers were. And it basically exonerated James Earl Ray. They called 70 witnesses in 30 days, and the jury took 59 minutes and came back and agreed that James Earl Ray did not do it. And so he's well known for that. But he is in D.C. because he was holding a press conference the following day, which I also attended. And basically what he's doing is, in about 2007, Sirhan Sirhan's lawyer died. And so he was contacted. I don't recall who contacted him, but he agreed to help Sirhan Sirhan. Now, Sirhan Sirhan, as most of you probably know, was convicted, he pled guilty to the shooting and killing of Robert Kennedy in California. And they avoided the death penalty because a few years later, California abolished the death penalty. But he's been in prison ever since. Now, there's a great deal of controversy about the RFK killing. Many people believe in a second gun. William Pepper certainly does. The alleged killer of RFK remains in prison, keeps getting denied parole. He's a pretty calm prisoner as it goes, had no recollection of the event. But Dr. Pepper was here again. He's a doctor because he's a PhD, I believe. Generally people call him doctor. But he's here to file with under the auspices of the Organization of American States, and he is basically going to file with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Again, that's the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is a body of the Organization of American States, which of course the United States is a signatory of or to. And he's doing this as sort of a last-ditch effort. He didn't feel terribly confident. And I think it's a panel of 5 or 7 people on this committee, and one of them is necessarily a North American. So who knows the type of political pressure, if any, or So he's not terribly optimistic. But he's trying to get Sirhan Sirhan out of prison, and he doesn't seem terribly confident that he can. So it's sort of a last-ditch effort, and, we'll see, but he's basically arguing that he was wrongfully convicted, and, therefore he's, seeking justice, and maybe it'll work.
So now I just want to clarify for everyone out there. Most of the King family does not support the idea that James Earl Ray murdered Martin Luther King Jr. Is that correct?
Yeah. Again, they were fully supportive of the 1999 effort, that civil case. So at the time, at least, yes, the King family supported William Pepper. There's no doubt about that.
Who else has been at the National Press Club?
Wayne Madsen spoke at the National Press Club the other night, and it was pretty funny, quite frankly, commenting on Trump and the allegations of criminality, and it was just some good, funny inside talk, and it was very entertaining. I think that can be found. I saw it already somewhere, so I think YouTube perhaps. But you could Google Wayne Madsen National Press Club, and when he's on to something, he's on to something, and he's pretty hard on Trump right now. So it's entertaining to say the least.
Now, I've been reading more and more about the Oswald Innocence campaign, though recently, Brian, it seems like it's been more about the Jack Ruby Innocence campaign. So what exactly do we know about this?
Well, it can seem like that. No, they do work on Oswald, it appears. For example, they're in the split in the JFK world that think the Altkin 6 picture, as it's known, where there's a photographer who took a famous photo where it looks like it could be Lee Harvey Oswald looking out the door. So that, photo's been analyzed and taken apart for 50 years. I mean, some of the photographers really believed at the time that was Oswald. Well, there's a split in the community, if you will, if you call it a community. Some think that's him. Some think it's a worker named Billy Lovelady, who superficially did resemble Oswald. They argue about the shirt. They argue about the nose. They argue about, they just argue about these things. And so I know the Oswald for Innocence or His Innocence campaign, Oswald Innocence campaign, I think it's called. They do focus on Oswald to some degree, at least. It appears of late they've come up with this idea that perhaps it was not Jack Ruby that shot Lee Harvey Oswald on TV in front of, many millions of Americans. Ike Pappas, the famous reporter who was standing right next to Jack Ruby, I guess somehow that slipped or maybe he's in on it. But they seem to want to argue that Jack Ruby is innocent. So yeah, it's led me to wonder if it's the Ruby is Innocent campaign or the Oswald is Innocent campaign. But no, they do work on Oswald, and some of this stuff, you got to agree with. We all agree on certain things. So to the extent they're seeking truth, good. I disbelieve I'm certain that was Jack Ruby that shot Oswald on TV. There were too many cops and too many reporters that knew him and said he was there. He was there. He did it. It's not a fake. That's Jack Ruby.
So I guess that sort of begs the question of where was Jack Ruby then? And I've also heard something about Oswald having been shot in a back room first or something about that. Do you know anything about either of these issues?
It's a great question. I'm a little confused myself because first they're saying that the person who is shooting Oswald is an FBI agent named James Bookout. And they showed pictures, the two faces next to each other. And okay, so your theory is that Jack Ruby, who I guess you're saying was not there, and your theory is that Bookout, who was dressed like Ruby, did the shooting. And I think now their theory is that Ruby was doped up. And so that's why Ruby truly didn't have a recollection. And he comes up with, and they argue, for example, that in every police, serious crime, they handcuff you. I mean, for every point, there's just a simpler explanation. He as he got tackled down, he was yelling, I know you guys. It's Jack Ruby. You all know me. And once they disarmed him, they were only bringing him upstairs on the very elevator Oswald had just come off. I think he went right into Oswald's cell even. So the fact that they didn't handcuff him, to me, is not evidence of anything. It's evidence that Ruby really wasn't resisting them. He knew them. And he was caught, and they had disarmed him. They took away his weapons, so they just brought him upstairs and threw him in the cell. The lack of handcuffs, to me, does not conclusively prove anything. But then, they have the drug, that dust drug from South America you blow into people's faces, and that allegedly takes over your mind, and people have been reported to have, helped empty their apartment, and the next day the landlord says, well, why did you do that? And he said, I have no recollection. I don't know what I did. But this drug is so strong, and I forget its name. It's like scopolamine or something. But this drug is so strong, supposedly, that that's what they now say, the CIA or whoever had it. I don't know what the Oswald Innocence campaign says, that they can speak for themselves. But I have read where they have alleged that Ruby had totally under mind-controlled drugs. And so it's unclear where where Ruby fits in, really. I suppose the idea would be that Bookout does the shooting and then blends into the crowd, and then, or is wrestled down, and then Ruby's just there. And I have heard also Oswald being shot in the back room, so I don't know, even if that's not Ruby, which is, I think, dubious. It is Ruby. Even if it wasn't Ruby, so wait, now you're saying Oswald's killed in the back room. Well, who got shot on national TV? So you're gonna deny that someone got shot on TV? I mean, what are we denying here? I mean, there are certain truths where you just have to kind of take it and move on. I mean, to argue now that Ruby is innocent, there's never been an innocent day of Ruby's life. He was connected with gangsters as a child. He was never innocent, so no, I don't buy that at all. Jack Ruby came in, I don't think he wanted to, but he came in, he eliminated Oswald and did it because someone told him to do it.
Now, Brian, you worked with John on the American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Now that it's on Amazon.com, you must be very excited.
Well, it's a really good feeling. I, of course, watched it a couple times when it first came out, and it's a really powerful film. John really used the material well. His interview with Jim Garrison, which is the basis of it, it's really a truly historic, perhaps the definitive, if not just one of the best, I think the definitive documentary on the JFK assassination. So yes, I'm very proud.
And this has been Brian Lloyd of Midnight Rider News. You'll be able to catch his work on MidnightRiderNews.com and on future episodes of the Midnight Rider News Show. So Brian, thanks. We'll be right back with John Barbour. When you want an alternative perspective that challenges the way we think, the way we are taught, and the way we believe, go to MidnightRiderNews.com and read the works of S.T. Patrick, Juliet Toth, and the rest of the Midnight Rider News team. At MidnightRiderNews.com, we speak truth to power, we fight for justice for those who've been treated unjustly, we challenge societal norms, and we always question authority. Please join us at MidnightRiderNews.com today. That's Midnight Writer, WRITER, news.com. What a bio John Barbour has. A Canadian high school dropout, John Barbour changed the face of American TV and is recognized as the Godfather of Reality TV, having created, co-hosted, and written Real People, a #1 hit show for NBC in the 3 years John was with the program. He was the first in TV to do film reviews on the news, having been the award-winning critic at large on NBC LA for 5 years. For 10 years, the often-quoted controversial critic of LA Magazine. He has won 5 Emmy Awards and has interviewed the likes of Cesar Chavez and Muhammad Ali. He's written comedic material for Frank Sinatra, appeared on The Dean Martin Show, and opened for various artists in Las Vegas. He was the host for The Gong Show in its pilot. He appeared on Sanford Son with his friend Red Fox, and he's released 2 comedy albums which are critically acclaimed to this day. For those of you listening to this show, you might know him best as the man who wrote and directed 1992's JFK assassination, the Jim Garrison tapes. He's just released part 2 of that, entitled The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It can be viewed and purchased on Amazon.com, and we'll have a special link to that on MidnightRiderNews.com. So with that said, here's the man of the hour, the Godfather of Reality TV, and the Lord of Las Vegas, John Barbour. John, how are you tonight?
Sean, I'm doing absolutely terrific. How are you, and where are you?
I'm doing very well, John. I'm about 5 hours south of Chicago in the great state of Illinois right now.
Why are you in Illinois?
Because that's my home, John.
Oh, how wonderful. Well, I'm in Las Vegas, where it's been for about 2 weeks between 105 and 117 degrees. And
wow.
Turned into a ghost town. People are seeking refuge in Death Valley. Anyway, it's wonderful to talk to you again, and congratulations on the Midnight Rider News.
Thank you.
Blog and site. You're just doing wonderful stuff, and you have great guests on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me.
So you just released The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy on Amazon. It's been a work in progress for a long time. You have to be extremely excited about that.
I am monstrously proud, and as a former critic, I hate to give a great review to my own movie, but quite honestly, when I look at the film, Sean, to me, it is probably the most important movie ever made in America. Now, that's indeed a mouthful, but it is, because if you look at this film, you understand why America is the monster mess that it is today. And it all began on November 22nd, 1963, when elements of the Central Intelligence Agency, and Jim Garrison uses that word elements. As a matter of fact, the clip that we have in the film, which shows him on the Johnny Carson show, where Johnny was cornered into booking him on the show because of Mort Saul and the audience's applause demanding that Jim Garrison appear somewhere on American television because you could never see him. But he does say, and he looks into the camera, he says, elements of our Central Intelligence Agency, of our government, murdered our president.
Absolutely.
And two things I really love about the film. First of all, Jim Garrison gets to tell his entire story completely unhindered by the media or by government, and it reveals a number of things. One of the things that it reveals is the birth of fake news, which is plaguing America today and misinforming us today, which reminds me of a line of Mark Twain's, which is also in the opening of the film talking about the media. He said, if you don't read America's newspapers, you're uninformed. But if you do, you're misinformed.
That's true.
He said that 100 years ago about the time of the fake Spanish-American War, for crying out loud. And every war since, with possibly the exception of the Second World War, has indeed been a fake war, from Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan to this terrorist rubbish that we're seeing now. But I am so proud of that because the film is monstrously like today's headlines. It is so topical. And I like the fact that some of the amazing reviews, Sean, if people go to Amazon, and we've made it only $1.99 to stream it so that everybody in America can and should see this story.
They should.
And it's like $4.99 if you want to own it. But if you go to Amazon, there are almost a dozen reviews in less than a week that are just so magnificently articulate and insightful. Two of the reviews written by men, and one of the men I know was one of the men who contributed to the film, a very successful businessman. He said at the end of the film he couldn't understand why he started bawling, why he started crying. And what it was is that he realized what they did to Kennedy and what they did to Garrison, and in a small way to me, because he destroyed my career, which didn't bother me, because if my career had not been destroyed, I would not have had a chance to do both part one of the Garrison tapes and now this, the most important film, The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But the thing that I guess delights me the most, and I hate to keep complimenting myself because I am so inept in every aspect of my life, and I have said this many times. I used to do a whole routine in my act about how all the really great things that happened to me all happened by accident. But all the horrible things that happened to me were the things that I planned really well.
Oh, gosh, no.
And again, it's an accident that I ended up doing this film. It's also an accident that Jim Garrison got involved in the assassination investigation, because as a man who said he was a victim of America's authority syndrome because he had been in the military and he was with the FBI, he initially believed the government and the Warren Report until an accidental meeting with Hale Boggs. But the thing that delights me is I am not a conspiracy theorist at all. I am just a storyteller.
Correct.
And I am not looking for converts or anything like that. I had to get this story off my mind. And it has been on my mind since I first tried to book Jim Garrison on my AM show in Los Angeles in 1970, when I was canceled for booking him after the publication of Heritage of Stone. And I read things in there that I never heard from the media and tried to book him on. He warned me that I wouldn't make it. I am a storyteller. And the success of Real People, which I created, proves, and I'm going to say this without bashfulness, that I was by far the best storyteller in reality television of anyone in the history of television. Right. And it is proven by the fact that when Real People got on the air, it was number 48 in the ratings on NBC. And NBC had lost the Moscow Olympics, so they were really in the toilet. But what happened with this show is it got 8,000 pieces of mail, which was more than the number one show. And I predicted to a guy named Maury Gelman at Daily Variety that this Canadian dropout was going to change the face of American television with what I call the entertainment of reality. A year later, we were the number one show. We were getting a 50 share. Wow. Can you imagine what a 50 share is? That is half of all television sets for 2.5 years watching television were watching my show. And I was the principal storyteller in that show. And when I was fired from the show because I tried to tell Jim Garrison's story on a bigger scale, the show immediately collapsed and died. I have always thought the Jim Garrison story was the greatest, most American story I have ever run across and could not be told. And fortunately, I was the only one to whom Jim Garrison would tell his story for the 10 years after he lost the Clay Shaw trial. But now I'm getting back to the point that I was going to make earlier about the thing that pleases me the most. And one of the things that I like about me, even though I shoot off my mouth before my mind can stop what my tongue is about to do, and it's happened to me ever since I was a youngster. I remember I was about 6 years old. I was in the first grade. And the teacher's asking the class. I was in school in Toronto, Canada. And the teacher's asking the class, why do Canadian geese fly south from the North Pole? And so a bunch of kids stood up and they said, well, teacher, they were looking for food, or, well, teacher, they were looking for a warmer place to nest, or, well, teacher, they were looking for something to eat. And so she came to me and she said, John, why do you think they flew south from the North Pole?
Right.
And I said, what other direction is there? Well.
That's great.
So she thought I was a smart ass, which I was. And yes. And always have been. I remember, you know, I'm totally non-religious, but I wanted I came from a severely dysfunctional family long before it was popular. And when I was about 12 years of age, there was a friend of mine, his name was Don Lee. God, I can remember everything, Sean. I mean, absolutely everything. Thank goodness for that. Thank goodness for my mind and my work, you know, because that's what's kept me company for so long. But anyway.
Absolutely.
His family was quite religious, and they moved across the street from a church a block away from me. And I went to them and asked them if they would adopt me. I was 12. And they laughed and they said no, and they thought, well, I needed comforting, and what I should do is come with them to church. And they bought me a Bible so that I could bring it to church. Well, of course, I memorized the Bible. My father had left Canada in 1939, joined the Canadian Army, and went to the peace and quiet of World War II. And so to get away from our very dysfunctional house, well, I prayed every day that I would come home from a hockey game or a movie or where a school or wherever I was, and my father would be there. And he was never there. But I went to church with these people, these wonderful people, for about 8 months. And nothing ever happened when I got home after all those prayers and all the hallelujahs and all the singing. So in the middle of a service, I just walked out on the minister and sat down on the steps. That was it for me. I'd closed my life to this because, you know, it's like Santa Claus. And it's like the Easter Bunny. After the service, the minister came out and he saw me sitting there. He noticed I'd walked out and put his arms around my shoulder. And you know, when he touched me and put his arms around my shoulder, I almost cried. Because nobody ever touched me as a kid. Nobody ever talked to me as a kid. And I'll get to the business of talking in a minute when I mention the name Jack Paar. Anyway, I told him that why I had walked out, it's just not working. And he said, well, you know about God's will, John? And I said, I know, sir, but I don't think I'm in it. And he paused. And he started to laugh. And right then and there, I knew that was going to be my ticket to surviving, was a wit that I did not understand where it came from. Okay, so the thing that pleases me the most, I said, you know, at the height of the Watergate scandal with Richard Nixon, I said on the air, you know, everybody was talking about all the major newscasters and talking heads on television. We're talking about Ronald Reagan, not Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon. The emperor is wearing no clothes. Everybody said that. And I went on in the air and I said, hey, you know, these people are not carrying this far enough. If the emperor, Richard Nixon, is not wearing any clothes, he should be arrested for indecent exposure. It seems like the obvious thing. So what we did, Jim Garrison, and you see it in the film, says, and it's 1981, he said, John, I have a list of people here for you who should be arrested today and tried for the murder of John Kennedy. Well, a lot of those people, of course, have died since then, except some did not. And since this is an open case with the Justice Department, you know, the House Select Committee did conclude 4 shots were fired, a conspiracy existed. And then again, in the movie, Jim Garrison says, John, the media never reported this. More people still believe the rubbish about the Warren Report. And then in order to quell the furor of interest in Kennedy as a result of Oliver Stone's film JFK, CBS trots out their $8 million man, Dan Rather, and it's called The Final Episode, the murder of John F. Kennedy. And he has the unmitigated gall to lie once again to America and say, the Warren Report has survived the test of time. It was demolished by the House Select Committee. They turned it over to the Justice Department for further investigation. It's never been investigated.
Correct.
So, to get to the thing that makes me really, it's a Jewish word called kvel, which is sort of like what a cat does. A cat purrs in contentment. Is we took the names of the 10 people alive today who should be questioned about the murder of John F. Kennedy. We made a 10 Most Wanted poster, and at the end of the film, I deliver the poster to the Justice Department. It is so simple now to follow up this case. But as James Corbett said, I had James Corbett on the other day.
Right.
And James had this fabulous Corbett report that I'm sure you're well aware of that comes out of Japan.
Yes.
He's done a lot of really great reporting and fact-finding and fact-revealing in 911. He says, and he names names in 911, but he says there will never be charges or a real investigation because there is no longer a Jim Garrison as a district attorney alive in America to bring charges. So I am thoroughly thrilled by my film. And I must say, as a film critic, I've seen thousands of movies, and 3 or 4 had the greatest openings I've ever seen. The first 8 minutes of this movie is by far the greatest 8 minutes of movie making and storytelling and fact-finding that I have ever seen as a film critic. Because what it does, it reveals instantly the story we're about to tell you about the corruption of the media in America. And then in the subsequent 9 chapters, it explains everything that you saw in that first 8 minutes. So I'm enormously proud of that. I hate to be bragging about it, but I can tell you to go to Amazon, and I may be understating my case if you read some of the reviews.
John, I don't think you're understating it at all. Now, let me ask you about the origin of the project. How did you decide to go after the American media?
Well, quite again by accident. When I did the interview with Mr. Garrison back in 1981, it was a 3.5-hour interview, and he talked a lot about the media. At one point in the interview, he said, John, there were elements of the media who were complicit with the CIA before Dallas. They had to spread the fiction before the facts could set in. And I didn't pay any attention to that. At the time, Sean, I was making more money in an hour than most people in America make today in a year. And so I was only interested in telling the story of his case, not attacking the media, because I'd never heard of fake media. I never thought about it. So I forgot about it. I did the Garrison tapes, and I was enormously proud of that. I was disheartened when nobody in America, no theater, would distribute the film in spite of all the great awards it got and the great reviews that it got. Even Oliver Stone said it's a perfect companion piece to his movie. None of the assassination sites would run it. No cable sites would run it. And yet it's had 1 million hits in those 25 years. And I've had to fire 40 copyright infringement charges against people who were stealing it and putting it up on their site. But that's okay. The story got around, and I never made a nickel from it. It cost me a couple of $100,000 to make it. But in any event, a year and a half ago, the candidates all assembled to start running for the Oval Office. And there were the dirty dozen Republicans, and I was wondering, my God, they found a really deep, wide barrel to get to the bottom and find these. Oh, my God, these people are reprehensible. But I watched it because I have my own little show. I love to write jokes about these people and what it is I watch. I made a living like that for a very long time. And they all started talking about the media and fake news. And I thought, hold it a minute. Where did I hear this before? And I remembered it was Jim Garrison. So I went back into my archives and I pulled out the DVDs, watched the 3.5 hours, and Sean, it was like he was talking to me today about the media. And I thought, my goodness gracious, I have got to do the sequel to the Garrison tapes Part 2. And, of course, the title just jumped out immediately, The American Media, and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy, because the two entities responsible for the murder of John Kennedy, first, our government, parts of the government, the CIA, and secondly, the media. And we see in the film, of course, we see Dan Rather lie. In 1963, the day after, he goes on television and he lies about the direction of the headshot going forward after the shot. And I've had numerous people, I mean really bright people, say to me, John, how could anybody believe that rubbish then? And I would tell them, hold it. Nobody saw the Zapruder film except Dan Rather. They didn't see it until 1975 when Geraldo Rivera and Dick Gregory and Bob Groden showed it late night on his show. And then America is so outraged. They storm Congress and say, let's have a new investigation. And the movie shows something you never hear about again. And that is the fact that the first guy appointed to head it is a tough Philadelphia lawyer named Richard Sprague. And he goes on camera and he says, we are going to solve this case because we are not hiring CIA or FBI agents as part of the staff. These are the people to be investigated. How shocking is that? Well, I'm telling you, the Central Intelligence Agency used their assets in the media and congressmen and senators, all of them named, to get rid of Richard Sprague and appoint that flaky Robert Blakey, who dedicated his book to the Central Intelligence Agency. I mean, people are going to, even a guy like James DiEugenio, who has Kennedy's and King, a really fabulous site. One of the very, very best researchers. You've had him on your show. I think he mentioned my movie. Even James, who came to see the movie twice, said, John, I learned stuff that's new in your movie. And William Manson Law, who knows as much about the body and the autopsies and Bethesda, or lack of autopsy, as David Lifton. David Lifton, as you know, had this bestseller in Best Evidence, and a really interesting book. We have touches of that in the film. Jackie Kennedy thought she was on Air Force One with her husband's casket. We show the helicopter and listen to the pilot talking about we're taking the body back in a helicopter. So she wasn't, his corpse wasn't even on that plane. But William Manson Law on camera, and if you go to, we have a site, www.jfk-media-assassination.com, where you can see a trailer, you can read reviews, you can read a lot of information about the film. William Manson Law said it moved him so emotionally, he has concluded that this is the greatest movie ever made about JFK. And, that is indeed high praise. What surprises me, and I guess I'll name names because it does surprise me. I'll put that aside a minute. Maybe I'll bring it up later. This case has been solved by Jim Garrison. He solved it in 1967. I have 67 boxes of all the material that was sent to the House Select Committee by Garrison. And the top thing in one of the boxes is David Ferry's confession about being with the Central Intelligence Agency. These boxes won't be revealed until the year 2039, and I doubt that anything will ever be really revealed about the Kennedy assassination, even though, as you and I speak, there are people all over the internet talking about the fact they're downloading new files from the CIA. Believe me, they will not download anything that incriminates or tells the truth about what happened to John Kennedy and how they murdered him, how they murdered Robert Kennedy, and how they murdered Martin Luther King. And they probably did the same to John Lennon. I wouldn't be surprised that John Kennedy's plane was not sabotaged, as was Hale Boggs' plane. Hale Boggs was the only dissenting member of the Warren Report. It was never published in the Warren Report. He was the one that told Garrison in an accidental meeting, there you go, accident again, that Lee Harvey Oswald could have never done that. And that's when Jim bought 3 sets. There are 26 volumes. He bought 3 sets of them. What's that, 72 books? He had a set in his office, a set in the car, and the set at home. And Lou Ivons, one of the investigators, says on camera in the movie, he memorized the Warren Report. And the things that he reveals in this movie about the trash that's in the Warren Report brought jeers from the audience. I mean, the audience absolutely loved this film. No one moved in the 2 hours and 10 minutes that this film played. If they had to go to the restroom, they rushed in, and they absolutely rushed back in to sit down. So again, everyone, absolutely everyone, should see this film. But I will add this, Sean. I have warned a lot of people, even at the theater. A lot of you shouldn't be here because you're going to hate me after you see the film, and I'm going to tell you why. We have been turned in this country into political, inactive zombies by the establishment, by our government, and by our media. Mark Twain said if voting made a difference, they wouldn't let us do it. That's right. So we have nothing to say about how this country is run. 1% select the presidential candidates, and the rest of the 99%, you and me, we get to elect them, but it's meaningless. I had somebody ask me, I keep reading about the shadow government. What is the shadow government? Well, I wrote a post 2 days ago. The shadow government are those people that we elect every 4 years. And the reason they're a shadow government is because they cannot govern, because they are governed by the central intelligence agencies and the bankers and the military-industrial complex. They are errand boys for them. And the interesting thing about Trump is the best thing about Trump is the two good things about Trump. He's not part of the Eastern establishment, as was not John Kennedy. True. John Kennedy was a Catholic fellow who went to Harvard. He was not part of the Eastern establishment. He was not part of those 30 families that own and run America that we seldom ever hear about. Okay, so it was easy to get rid of him and Bobby. And then, of course, they set up Teddy Kennedy so that he could never become president. And that started in Las Vegas when they filmed him with hookers in a hotel here in Las Vegas. And that's not a very well-known story, but that happened long before Chappaquiddick. But it didn't quite keep Teddy quiet, and so they set up Chappaquiddick, and that shut him up. And again, as I said, it wouldn't have surprised me that John Kennedy Jr. was done in, because he had already interviewed Wayne Madsen. Have you had Wayne on the show?
No, not yet, but we plan on having him on very soon.
Oh, Wayne is fabulous. You must have him on the show. But Wayne told me that he'd been interviewed by John Jr. because they wanted to do a series of stories about the murder of his father. And he was contemplating not only doing that, but running for Senate in New York. And they got rid of him. And one of the ways you might realize that they did get rid of him is that all civilian searches were halted by the military. The search was taken over by the Pentagon.
Really?
So people were not allowed to search for the plane or the bodies or anything for weeks. So that's the first indication that something sly was afoot by the government. But I don't want to get into all of those areas, because if you solve John Kennedy's murder, you have solved every crime perpetrated by this government since November 22nd, 1963, which includes the fake war in Vietnam, the fake war in Iraq. Now, I'll tell you why I warned some people not to see the film. We all knew that George Bush and Condoleezza Rice and Powell were all full of crap when they were talking about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Absolutely.
And that Condoleezza Rice, that pig who ended up being inducted into the Masters golf tournament, that golf course, still teaching at Stanford, getting $200,000 to speak when she should be hanging from a lamppost in Washington, D.C., when she said, let's hope that this smoking gun is not an atomic bomb. So that kind of talk scared Americans into supporting George Bush, and most Americans want to follow their father and mother figures for the rest of their life, and that's how they look upon the government. But millions of us took to the streets and marched, and it did no good. Hundreds of thousands of us protested 9/11. First, George Bush wanted to appoint Henry Kissinger, another war criminal who helped murder Salvador Allende in Chile, along with Richard Nixon, another man who should be hanging from a rope in Washington, D.C. And there was such an outcry from the families of the victims that Bush had no recourse but to remove Kissinger and appoint a bunch of other flunkies. And then he would not testify unless he could sit like a ventriloquist dummy on Cheney's knee. They two of them had to testify together. They refused to do it under oath, and all of that is private to this day. So Americans by the hundreds of thousands said, hey, we need a real investigation because this is another Warren report. They never even looked into Building 7's collapse. And Dr. Judy Woods, in her brilliant book called Where Did the Towers Go?, is the only person in America who brought a lawsuit against the government and NIST for their illegal and misinforming, non-performed NIST report because they never reported on Building 7. But again, I don't want to get into all of these other things because they were all perpetrated They all got away with it because they got away with the greatest murder in American history,
right.
The murder of John Kennedy.
Right.
And it was easy for them to do because they'd already murdered democratically elected. They had murdered Mossadegh in Iraq because he had confiscated British petroleum because he wanted a better deal for his people. And Eisenhower called in Dulles and said, we got to get rid of that commie. So they murder him. And they did it all over. They did it all over the world. Martin Luther King at the Riverside Church in New York, 1 year before he had his head blown away by the CIA, he said, I hate to say this, but the largest terrorist organization in the world is our government and our military. And it is. It's true. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it, but nobody will admit it.
You're right.
No, the only people who admit it are people like you and I who have no impact and we have no voice.
Right.
We're fortunately, now they're trying to destroy the internet.
Absolutely.
Because they put out of business already thousands of people earning $100,000 or $200,000 a year with conspiracy sites because they're getting advertisers to remove all their advertisement. It's a very smart scheme. The people that own this country because they're extremely smart. It's not because they're evil. I must tell you, St. John Hunt, E. Howard Hunt's son, spoke in Dallas when you and I were there.
Yes, he did.
And he said something very profound. He said that his father told him they were performing a public service for America because they got rid of a president who was going to destroy the United States of America and the American way of life. All of these people feel they are doing good. The Nazis who built the death camps felt that getting rid of homosexuals and socialists and Jews, they were ridding the planet of vermin. Thank God we're getting rid of these vermin. They felt they were doing God's work. These people never feel evil. And anybody who felt evil could not perform an evil act. He'd be ashamed of himself, or she would be ashamed of himself. They feel what they're doing is justified. And I would tell you probably that people who are serial killers, people who are rapists, they do not think that they are evil. They feel somehow compelled to do what it is that they are doing. So all you have to do, get rid of doing all of these things in Dallas and New Orleans and Pittsburgh or wherever they hold these meaningless conferences, and all these assassination sites on Facebook are just buried in trivia. It was that love lady. Wait a minute. Did the shot come from the Deltics? Who cares? It doesn't matter. Garrison solved the case. All they have to do is follow Jim Garrison's lead, but none of them will. Now I'll get to a really sad part about why this will never be solved. We live in a cesspool of celebrities. And I have hated celebrities ever since I was one. Because most celebrities, and I'm talking about celebrities, are movie stars or television stars.
Right.
They are speaking the words of writers.
True.
They are not speaking their own thoughts. So when you see their films, you think, my God, these people are brilliant. But you get them to talk off camera and off screen, and most of them are idiots. Absolute and total idiots. And America is so obsessed with celebrities. Well, the sad thing is, the smart folks at Langley see somebody pop up who looks like they may become a leader. And as Garrison said, if they can't murder them, they discredit them. They assassinate their character. And that destroys them. Mm-hmm. There is no one in this country alive today that looks like a hero to the mass American audience. Not one. But the only man around today who could bring some force to the Justice Department is Oliver Stone. If Oliver Stone announced tomorrow, folks, November 22nd, I want 25,000 people to join me in front of the Justice Department. After this, November 22nd is going to be America's Bastille Day. We're going to get them to reopen this case. He would have 50,000 people show up.
Oh, absolutely. At least.
Now,
at least 50,000.
I can understand that Oliver seems to be avoiding all this. Who knows? You know, he did a wonderful movie about Snowden.
Right.
I was not impressed with what he did with Putin. It was more like about Oliver than it was Putin, but at least he's bringing these people to our attention. He brought Hugo Chavez to our attention. But again, if you want to solve everything that's wrong with America, the America that makes Snowden run out of the country, I say in the movie that we have liars that run for office and truth tellers that run for their lives, and Snowden, one of those, okay? Now, if you ask who's the guy that's got brain tumors now, McCain?
Yeah.
If you ask McCain or Donald Trump, like Donald Trump says, make America great again. If you ask Trump or you ask Hillary Clinton or you ask Bill Clinton, the worst president in the history of the United States, or you ask Rush Limbaugh or Bill O'Reilly or any of these talking heads, any of them, conservative or liberal. There are no more liberals. Rachel Maddow is not a liberal. But if you ask any of these people, what is America? I'm asking you. Pretend you're Bill Clinton. Okay, Mr. Clinton, what is America? Answer me.
I would say that America is the U.S. Constitution and the inalienable rights of the people, actually. That's what I would say.
There you go. If he was smart enough to say that. America, the only thing that is truly American is the Constitution. After I'd been deported and I finally got permission to re-enter the United States, I learned everything about American history. So when I went into the consul in the U.S. consul in Toronto on Spadina Avenue, even remember the address of the place for crying out loud. It was a lady. She was about 50 years of age, was a consul general. And I thought they were going to ask me about the Supreme Court or the Civil War or the president and how many congressmen, how many. I was waiting for that. And you know what she asked me?
What?
John, why do you want to go to the United States? And I was totally unprepared for the answer.
Really?
And so I said two things. I said, first of all, it is the only country in the world that is built on a law, and that law being the Constitution of the United States. It is the only country in the world that's peopled by every other country in the world, so it's multicultural. I said, but I guess my love for the country began because, as you know, I was semi-orphaned. I used to live in a theater. I saw one too many Frank Capra movies. I loved Jimmy Stewart, and that's how I learned about America. But at the end of every movie, it said made in Hollywood. And I said, my main goal is to get to Hollywood through the United States.
Yeah.
And she granted me permission. That's the first time I ever cried. Because it was like a dream come true. Yeah, I was broke. I had nothing. I didn't have a job. I only had one suit, one pair of shoes. But I knew that somehow or another I'd get into this country, and I would love being here. And I do love being here. As much as is wrong with the country, and about 95% of the country is all wrong. But, it's like when I was a movie critic, and it's like with people. People would ask me about movies, and I would say, 99 out of 100, like people, are absolute crap. But one comes along that makes the whole medium worthwhile. You see a movie like Network, and oh my God, you think, gee, do I love movies?
Right.
It's the same with people. It's like meeting a Jim Garrison or a Gore Vidal or Cesar Chavez, who came on my show, or Muhammad Ali. I mean, truly great heroes. Muhammad Ali, I had him on my show, and most people wanted him hanging from a lamppost or a tree because he said, I'm not going to Vietnam to kill yellows. I have more trouble with whites right here at home. I mean, how courageous is that? And he's still just a young man, and he has the courage to say stuff like that. Well, Americans are all cowards. They are all cowards. And let me tell you something about that. And I know that because I've witnessed it throughout history. The only positive changes made in history are made by black sheep. They are made by the rebels who challenge the status quo. I don't care what progress you look at throughout history, it started by a man or a woman who was considered a black sheep and a renegade. And that continues to this day. Most people are cowards. Most people do not think, and most people do not reason. They are just emotional creatures because they were raised emotionally and nurtured or not nurtured emotionally long before their brains developed when they were about 10 or 12 years of age. And I have seen that countless times. I know people who are monsters. They belong to Mensa. They have major IQs, but they are emotional midgets. And they come to conclusions. You and I and everybody on the planet has access to all the history, all the information and facts about history since the world began. If we have this information, why are we all so different in our beliefs? Because we use our minds to justify our emotional prejudice. We do not use our minds to reason. The only place that reason is evident is in mathematics. And only 1 in a million people understand mathematics at all. They are incapable of reasoning. And I'll tell you another thing. This may sound shocking to you.
Okay.
I am the only person I know who has an absolutely open mind.
Mm-hmm.
And ask me, how can you possibly say that?
How can you possibly say that, John?
Okay, I'll tell you why.
All right.
Because I don't believe in anything. I only know things, but I believe in nothing. If you believe in something, you have a closed mind. If you believe in God, and supposing some genius comes along and say, hey, I can prove to you there is no God, they will not listen to your argument. Ergo, they have a closed mind. If you believe that Hillary Clinton would make a better president, and somebody can prove to you that she is a criminal, she helped murder Gaddafi, she should be hanging somewhere, in jail somewhere, as should her husband be in jail somewhere. If they don't listen to your arguments or your reasoning, they have a closed mind. I have no beliefs, because a belief is only a belief. It is not knowing. I had a wonderful guest on my show tonight. His name is David Paulides. He's written, you should have him on it as a guest too.
Okay.
He has a wonderful movie called 411 Missing. He is a former policeman, 20 years in the service, and he discovered there are literally thousands of unsolved missing persons from national parks in America.
Thousands.
And you cannot get the files from any police department in America about these missing cases. I mean, truly. And he's written 6 very successful books. And he said to me, and I asked him to speculate, because there's a lot of talk out there about UFOs and Bigfoot and stuff like that. And he said, John, very simply, like Jack Webb and Dragnet, I only deal in facts. I only deal in the facts that I can understand. A lot of stuff I cannot understand. I had Dr. Judy Wood on my show because it's true that the buildings turned to dust. They left no seismic impact in the ground. Now, you got 100 million tons of steel and concrete falling into the ground in New York City. First of all, had that happened, the water basin under the buildings would have erupted and flooded Manhattan. So those buildings were dustified, as she said, before they hit the ground. She, in her book, now I don't understand physics and the kind of mathematics and stuff that she demonstrated, but she wrote the book so well, even I could understand it. Mm-hmm. The Kingdom, when it came down, is half the weight of the Twin Towers. It left a seismic footprint in the ground. Okay, the Richter scale recognized it. The Richter scale recognized nothing in New York. And yet, people denigrate Dr. Judy Woods, but I am one of those people. I will listen. If somebody said to me, John, I am really devout believer in God, and I will prove to you that God exists. I'd love to come on your show. I would have him or her on my show.
Right.
I will have almost anybody on my show except somebody who advocates cruelty or harm to any living creature. But other than that, I would have anybody on my show, and I welcome them. I have people I disagree. I had John. Who was John Dean? No, I had John Dean on the show. John Dean was defending the CIA, and he called the Watergate burglary just a minor accident.
Oh, God.
Stuff like that. Well, it's a bunch of rubbish.
Right.
And
absolutely.
I thought that I thought he would be more outspoken against what the government's been doing to America recently that forces people like Snowden out of the country. Well, he thinks Snowden's a traitor, for crying out loud. But I had him on the show, and I will have anybody on the show like that. So
now, in the review I wrote for your film, I did say that John Barbour does have beliefs. He believes in the truth, he believes in justice, and he believes in Jim Garrison. Do you not think that's accurate?
Yeah, but it's not a belief. It's a knowing. I know that Jim Garrison's telling the truth. I know that the truth exists. Okay? I loved your review. It was brilliantly written, and I really appreciate that. It's better written than I could have written one myself.
Thank you.
But, and I think of myself, God, this is kind of corny. I think of myself as kind of a spiritual person. And being a non-believer is almost a lie, because from the beginning this show, this movie, the American media and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy, it has been blessed. I don't know what other word to use, because I'll tell you, Sean, I had scores and scores of horrifying setbacks while trying to make this film. And I was heartbroken a number of times. I thought, oh, my God, this is really tough. I've got to get this story out of my system. And so while I would be waiting for something to be corrected, I would go on to the Internet and just start surfing the Internet for information. Well, that's how I found Richard Sprague.
Okay.
People don't know that footage exists that I have in my movie. And I thought, my God, it's only like 12 or 15 or 20 seconds, but it's gold because it reinforces the truth of what I know.
Right.
And this happened time and time and time again. And so I think I have no idea what's going to happen to the film. But when I said about Real People that I was going to change the face of American television with what I call the entertainment of reality, I believed in my ability as a storyteller, because that I do well. I may not tell stories well, but I write them well. So I knew that was going to happen. I have had a feeling. I haven't had that feeling of positiveness since I did Real People. I have that feeling now with this film. Something magical is going to happen with this film. I don't know what it is. It may happen around October 26th, when the CIA is supposed to be releasing thousands of more files if Donald Trump approves it, because it's up to the President of the United States if he's still president of that at that time, and not Spence, somebody else. But it could. I don't know when it's going to happen, but something blessed and big is going to happen to this film. Now, it has been accepted by the Motion Picture Academy for Oscar consideration, which was my major concern. That happened about 3 weeks ago.
That's fantastic.
I think it is too strong a movie for these people to vote for, because when they look at this film, and most of the people at the Motion Picture Academy were alive when John Kennedy was murdered, so they're going to pay more attention to this film. But when they see the shocking truth of the dreadful complicity by the media to protect the known murderers of John Kennedy, And we paid these people millions of dollars a year to lie to us and continued to lie to us. And nobody's fired for lying. Look at that. Brian Williams never got fired for lying. And Bill O'Reilly never got fired for lying. They only got fired for, or Riley got fired for his sexual escapades, for crying out loud. And the same thing with the president of the of Fox News. He said, you know, Roger Ailes, when I used to do Merv Griffin's show. I'm going to go back to about an hour ago when I said about talking. My two heroes in television, first off, with Jack Parr, whom you probably don't even remember.
Yes, I do. Jack Parr was the host of The Tonight Show.
Well, okay. Anyway, Jack Parr was by far the best and the only really good late-night talk show host ever. I mean, Mike Douglas did a really nice job in Philadelphia. Merv did a nice job on Westinghouse. They were the best, but Jack Parr, he was by far the best. Now, when I was a kid, I was about 15, and I'm alone in this little room that I'm living in, watching a small black and white screen. I couldn't get enough of Jack Parr. And you know why? I had never seen anybody talk to anybody.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know people had conversations.
Right.
I never overheard any in my family. I never saw any in any other families. Mostly I saw yelling or I saw disinterest. And when I saw Parr, I thought, you mean people actually talk to one another? I would love to do that. And that's what I decided to do. I'm going to grow up and I'm going to become a talk show host on television. And that's the reason I became a comic, because at the start of every one of his shows, he did these brilliant monologues. And I can remember a lot of his material. I remember when somebody asked him why he didn't vote. And he said, I don't vote because it only encourages them. I mean, how wonderful. It's funny to this day.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
And then my other hero was Edward R. Murrow. And I remember the impact it had on me when I watched this documentary called Harvest of Shame. And it shows how these poor Chicanos are being exploited on these massive farms for their labor and picking fruit. And Ed Murrow reveals that these farms are owned by Coca-Cola. And I thought, and I'm a kid, and I think, God, what a great story. It's like a detective story. And, of course, they destroyed Ed Murrow at CBS, and they had to turn him into some celebrity talker. He ended up visiting people in their homes, and I could never watch again because they were destroying him. So that broke my heart. But these kinds of news people don't exist anymore. Jack Parr doesn't exist anymore. As a matter of fact, intellectuals in television do not exist anymore. It's all passé. It is all gone. Ideas are all gone. There are 500 channels in television. It's just more straws in the same septic tank.
Well, speaking of television, John, can you tell us that story about the demise of your time at NBC? I mean, it's one of the most tragic stories I've ever heard in my life.
Well, you know, it isn't. It isn't. I mean, we got to do this movie that you and I both love, you know. So that's what happened. But and real people got on the air quite by accident. I had quit show business. I was 46 years of age. And nobody wanted me in town because I was the most acerbic and quoted critic in town. I was only on 3 nights a week. I had no contract. And the reason I had no contract, and I was only getting $150 a show, that's $450 a week. The weather girl was getting thousands, okay? And 10% of the audience tuned in to listen to my reviews. I mean, to this day, Jeff Rance calls me and quotes me lines that he heard when he was younger watching me give these reviews. So anyway, when I created the idea for Real People, I was at NBC, and I sat right next to the wire services. And one of the machines was called Reliable Sources, and I think I'm trying to remember if it came from UPS or Reuters. But often they would they would teletype a story, and they would say not for air, and they would tell you what the story was. And the story that I read was a place called the Nub Club in Louisiana. And in order to be a member of the Nub Club, you had to have either a missing finger or a missing toe. Something missing.
What?
And the reason for that was these people were so poor. The only reason they could collect money if they were somehow physically incapacitated.
Oh, my gosh.
And so poor people would shoot off a finger, they'd shoot off a toe.
Oh, my gosh.
And after a while, they began to hear of one another, and they formed a club called the Nub Club.
Of course.
And I thought, oh, my God, what a story. But, of course, it said not for air. Well, you would never see a story like that on the news. Then another one that I eventually shot and used on real people, and it was called The Stripper for God. It was this gorgeous, she must have been about 5'9", the most magnificently built female you ever saw. Looked like Anita Ekberg, if you could remember what Anita Ekberg looked like.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, she could, every month, she could have been on the cover of Playboy magazine, and it was all real. It was before Silicon Valley for women, okay? And she felt that God had given her such a divine body that she should show it off to men.
Nice.
And that men should pay to look at it, and she should reward God by contributing to a church. And so that's what she did. She called herself the Stripper for God. And she tithed the church.
Oh,
of course,
my
the church
gosh.
only got 10%, like
absolutely.
the Mormon church does. But she got 9% and made a great living. And I eventually told the story in Real People. Well, there was, oh, God, if I could remember his name, the producer, the most famous producer in Hollywood, who did The Way We Were. He did Funny Girl. Darn it. He was married to Fanny Bryce's daughter.
I can't
anyway,
remember.
if I mentioned his name, no. He had called me one day because he was a fan of my reviews. He wanted me to write a movie script, an original script, for which he would pay me $50,000. And I told him I wasn't a film writer and I wanted to do reality television. And he was so thrilled with the idea. I told him these stories. But William Morris, Ray Stark was his name.
Oh, okay.
And most famous producer in Hollywood. And his agent called me and said, we only want Ray to make movies. He doesn't want to get into television. So what happened is I got a deal. My wife got me a deal with a fellow named Danny Arnold. Danny Arnold was co-creator of Barney Miller. Barney Miller was one of the really good sitcoms.
Absolutely. Fantastic show.
Godfather, Chris Hayward, was the writer-producer who got the show. He wrote an episode so good it was picked up by ABC. Now, I'm going to tell you how lucky people are. You remember a show called That Girl?
Yes, absolutely. Marlo Thomas.
Okay. Half of it took place in the office and half of it took place in her home?
Right.
Okay. Danny's daughter.
Yes, Marlo
daughter,
Thomas.
Whatever. Anyway, yeah, Marlo Thomas. When Danny Arnold and his partner created the show, half of the show took place in the precinct and half in the home where Barney Miller, I forget who played Barney. What was his name? Lyndon. Hal Lyndon played him. Okay.
Yes.
Anyway, Chris Hayward, the show is not doing well, and ABC's not going to pick it up. And Chris Hayward went in to see Danny Arnold and said, geez, why don't you do this like, remember the movie Detective Story with Kirk Douglas?
Yes, absolutely.
Just do it all in the precinct. And Danny says, nobody wants to watch a half hour of a dirty precinct. So Chris Hayward, on the 13th episode, the final episode, then it was going to be canceled. He wrote an episode. There was a major snowstorm in New York. They couldn't get back to the apartment. They had to do it all in the precinct. Richard Schickles at Time magazine is a critic, and he sees it. He says, my God, what a wonderful show. ABC has second thoughts, and they pick it up. Well, Danny Arnold never believed it would work. The girl who was hired to play Hal Lyndon's wife would pay thousands of dollars every week for years, and never made an appearance on the show. Danny Hartman was waiting for the show to collapse to bring back the wife.
Absolutely.
That's how lucky some of these idiots are in this business. And I can tell you a story about how Lucy came to own I Love Lucy, but that's for other show. Again, quite by accident because of the idiots at CBS. But in any event, I get this deal to develop Real People, but the title is called National Graffiti. And that was because of National Enquirer, the newspaper where I got a lot of stories, and American Graffiti, that great film about the 70s. Just a fabulous film. And I take it to ABC, and guess I'm going to use Richie Pryor as my co-host, my Byron Allen. Now, Richie was in jail at the time. He had just done a special at NBC, and he punched an NBC executive up for censoring one of his skits. And then the IRS was waiting in the lobby to arrest him because he wasn't paying his taxes. Anyway, this is a guy that I wanted as a co-host.
Sure.
And I went into Lou Ehrlich, and I named names. When you eventually read my book, you will see a lot of names. Anyway, I told Lou Ehrlich I wanted my co-host to be Richard Pryor. He leaned over the table in anger and says, that nigger's never getting on this network. He threw me out of the office. He told me I meant crap to television, threw me out of the office. So anyway, it was over with. My career was over with. I mean, I had decimated so many movie stars and directors. Even Alfred Hitchcock, who invited me to his 50th anniversary, invited me and my wife. I called him the Baskin Robbins of directors.
What?
It's 32 flavors of the same story. And he loved it, okay?
Really?
Now, some people who are sure of themselves can take that kind of observation. But anyway, I'm 46 years of age. I remember exactly where I was. I'm going to put that on pause a minute because I got to mention this. When I was the critic at NBC, I got a call from George Slaughter. George Slaughter was the executive producer, co-creator of Laugh-In. Laugh-In was really created by an English drunk by the name of Digby Wolfe, a really witty writer who wrote the best jingles and jokes. I mean, he was brilliant. And he thought of the title while he was in a supermarket. Things come to people when, at the oddest time. Anyway, I got a call from George, and he's quoting me the lines from my review. And he said, can I pay you to use these on my show? And I said, sure, but I got a better idea. And I don't even know why I said this, because I wasn't looking to be a star. I wanted to be a talk show host. I said, I'll tell you what, hire me as a writer for minimum and give me a minute, because everything on your show is only a minute long, and I'll be your critic at large. I'm the critic at large here on the news. Let me be the critic at large on Laugh-In. He said, what a great idea. So myself and Digby Wolfe and George Slaughter and a woman named Candace Rockland wrote the 4 revivals of Laugh-In, on which that brilliant Robin Williams was introduced. We introduced a lot of fabulous talent to that show, all working for scale. Well, the show didn't work because it wasn't hosted by one person. Slaughter destroyed the first Laugh-In because Rowan and Martin became the stars, more so than George Slaughter. So it became Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and he destroyed the show. It was only on 3 years. He did the same with Real People. Anyway, we're getting to that. So now I'm standing on the street corner, 46 years of age, and I literally say to myself, my son is 7 years of age. And I say to myself, you know what, John? You're not going to make it in show business. It's over. It's over. Everybody wants to hire you as a comedy writer. I'll get a job as a writer, and I will become the best father any child ever had. And that became my goal, because I remembered absolutely everything about my dreadful childhood, and I knew I didn't want to be raised that way. And I knew that I would really love my son and raise him I was the best father any child ever had. And, of course, his mother, Sarita, was by far the best mother any child ever had. And that's why my son is one of the greatest people I have ever met. I met three geniuses in my life: Jim Garrison, Buckminster Fuller, the scientist, and my son. So anyway, Sean, it was the first time in my life I ever felt at peace. It was the first time I was at ease. I didn't want anything. All the pressure was gone. I get in the house, kiss my wife, hug my son, get ready to go to bed, so contented. And the phone rings, and it's Digby Wolf. And Digby Wolf says, John, I just heard that ABC passed on your reality idea. I said, yeah. He said, well, I have a contract with Westinghouse to develop shows. Could you bring it over to the office tomorrow? Maybe I could get it on Westinghouse. Now, I had an affinity with Westinghouse because when I used to do Merv's show and he went to CBS, Westinghouse put me under contract as his replacement, and they used my ratings to get David Frost's money down. So, anyway, what happens is I go in to meet Digby. And while I'm sitting in the other office, which is across from Slaughter's office, the door opens and there's George Slaughter. And he said, who are you waiting for? I said, I'm waiting to see Digby. He said, well, while you're waiting, come on in here. Then he tells me he has a contract to do 4 specials at NBC called Country versus City, Country Music versus City Music, Country Jokes versus City Jokes. He said, why don't you do your show here? Then he writes a salary on a piece of paper. And the salary says $5,000 a show. So I write back. I said, where's my writing fee? Boom, he writes back, $1,500 for a writing fee. Then I write back, well, where's my created by fee? And he writes back another $1,500 for the created by fee. Then I write about what my producer fee. We haven't even spoken.
Right.
And then he speaks. He says, no, John, you can't produce it.
Oh.
He says, because I don't want any lawsuits with Danny Arnold. So you can't produce it. But you can do all the other things and make it much more than you're making now as a $450 a week critic. He already knew how much money I was making over there, and so that's how it started. Now it becomes the #1 show because of me. I was a storyteller. Now somebody out there is going to say, oh, John Barbour, what an egomaniac. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Hamlet was written 11 times before Shakespeare wrote it. And you've heard of the Jumping Frog of Calaveras County?
Yes, absolutely.
Mark Twain's very first story that made him a star. Do you think that event took place only the day that Mark Twain showed up?
Right.
It had been around for 27 years. Mm-hmm. And then Mark Twain shows up and he writes about it. It's not always the story, it's the storyteller. And I knew how to tell those stories. A lot of this is revealed in the movie. Some of the magnificent stories we told, some of the great laws that we got passed in the United States, including the construction of the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. We played the major part in getting that wall built, and nobody knows it until they see this film. Anyway, the NBC brass, they call Slaughter and they want him to do a ripoff of Network, Patty Chayefsky's brilliant movie. I'm mad as hell, not going to take it anymore. And so he does. He hires Marjo Gortner. He hires a really beautiful black lady. I can't remember her name offhand. And then a friend of ours, the fellow who became Herb Brooks, who was the coach of the successful U.S. hockey team against the Russians. We became very good friends. Anyway, the show is bombing. It's just dying. And George Slaughter asked me if I would please help him. And I said, I can't, George. I'm working 20 hours a day, writing these hours every week. I can't do it. I got to edit. I got to write. I've got to supervise. I've got to look at it. I don't have time. Then I read in the newspaper, in the middle page, that the House Select Committee had concluded 4 shots had been fired in Dealey Plaza. First thing I do, Sean, is pick up the phone and call Mr. Garrison. Mm-hmm. And I'm almost yelling in the phone, Mr. Garrison, do you feel vindicated? I just read the House Select Committee conclusions. And Sean, He said very calmly, John, I feel like a blind man, got a very small trophy in a very dark room, only I know I got it. I mean, I loved the way this man talked. And in the film, when Mike Wallace accuses him of drugging his witnesses to get a conviction of Clay Shaw, the way he answers him, Neil Simon could not have written it. Right. William Shakespeare could have not written it. Gore Vidal. It was so brilliant, and it was ad-lib. So anyway, I said to him, how many people have called you to tell your story? Huntley and Brinkley and Cronkite and Rev. He said, John, you're the only one who's called me. And I said, you're kidding. He said, it was like when you called me to book me 10 years ago. You were the only one to call me. And I laughed and I said, well, we're going to tell your story now. So I went down and I did the interview for 3.5 hours. And you see a lot of it in the film. Anyway, the crucial part of this is part one was so powerful and there was so much information. We had to do a part two. And in part two, during the actual interview, I asked him how many shooters there were in Dealey Plaza. And he said, John, well, 3 teams of probably 2 and maybe 3. 2 shooting from the front, 1 from the back, not from the 6th floor of the book depository. The book depository, John, has nothing to do with the assassination. That's just where they planted the patsy. And he said there might have been a 3rd because this is their most important killing, and the 3rd would have been a radio man. So there's about 9. So when he says 9, I then say to him, how many people, Mr. Garrison, do you think actually knew John Kennedy would be killed in Dealey Plaza? And he said, very matter-of-factly, well, John, it's on a need-to-know basis, and this is the most important killing that they're going to be involved in. And then he explains you have 9 men who are the shooters, and you have this, and then you have that, few people in Washington and the CIA. And he ends up saying about 30, 32. That's how he answers. So anyway, I put together part 2. Now, I must tell you, nobody in prime television had ever seen Jim Garrison until they saw part 1 on Speak Up of America. The second showing the following week, there were people lined up in the halls to see Jim Garrison. The studio could not have been more packed if the Pope or the President himself had been on that stage. They wanted to hear Mr. Garrison. Anyway, Marjo Gartner leans forward and he says, Mr. Garrison, how many shooters were there in Dealey Plaza? Well, in the middle of the night before this episode aired, my field producer, Donna Cantor, was taken downstairs to the editing room with George Slaughter at exactly midnight with orders never to call me, and he re-edited my story. So that when Marjo Gartner says, Mr. Garrison, how many shooters were there in Dealey Plaza? George Slaughter has Mr. Garrison say, about 30. That makes anybody look like an idiot.
Yeah.
And I screamed at the set, and the same time the phone rang, and it's Slaughter. He says, now what do you think of Mr. Garrison? And I start yelling at him, what did you do? What did you do? And he said, Garrison's a nut. He got what he deserved. I said, you're the nut, and you're going to get what you deserve. Well, I didn't know it, but in those days, they had answering machines. And my answering machine had accidentally been left on, so I recorded all this. I called Mr. Garrison, I explained in the film, and I'm literally crying. I'm sobbing, and I'm so embarrassed. And he's so peaceful and calm. And I'm telling him, you've got to sue. You alone, Slaughter. You alone, NBC. NBC's going to have to give you more than equal time. They're going to have to give you a whole show in prime time. And he said, John, if I pursued every lawsuit and every libel against me, I would never see my family. Wow. We love your show. I want you to continue doing the show. And then he chuckled and said, just send me a few Real People T-shirts.
Wow.
And then he said, by the way, if you want another great story, here's the name of the fake Oswald who's in prison back east. Bring him a Real People T-shirt, and he'll tell you the whole story, too. Well, the next day, Slaughter and I almost got into a fist fight. And he was a big man. He was a bouncer. He was Mae West's bouncer. He was a bouncer at Ciro's. That's how he got associated with the business, being a bouncer. And, of course, I would have been no match for him, but I was a yelling match for him. And then when I left the office, Donna Cantor came into my office sobbing that she was sorry that had happened. And that ended Real People. That ended me in Hollywood, and it was over with. I got a number of odd jobs in Hollywood. As a matter of fact, I got called by a producer at CNN. There used to be a show called Sonia at Noon on CNN that originated in Hollywood. And this young guy calls me. I had a local show. I got a local show, and I had people like Frank Sinatra on. I had great people love to come on my show. And anyway, this kid calls, and he said, Mr. Barbour, do you think your station would let you come to CNN for 2 weeks to sit in for Sonia? I think her name was Sonia Friedman. And I said, Sonia's show at noon? And he said, yes. And I said, you remember me from Real People? And he said, what's Real People? I said, hold a minute. You don't know who I am? He said, this is the only, I've never seen you before, except I love watching your show. And I think you'd be a perfect substitute for her. So they hired me. And then I put on fabulous people on the show. Remember Gallagher?
Absolutely.
The
yes.
I put Gallagher. I put all kinds of terrific people on the show. I get a call from the head of programming in Atlanta. And he's telling me that it looked like King was going to be hospitalized with a heart transplant or a heart operation, and would I fill in for Larry King? And I said, oh my God, how wonderful.
Yeah.
And it
seriously.
all stopped because somehow word got out in the business, and probably it was Slaughter, who was in the A crowd, because I was sabotaged at every turn by not only Slaughter, but a half a dozen people, because they had been victims of my reviews, okay? It's a very vindictive, very egomaniacal, very jealous town. And I was the object of all of that, and I didn't mind. I had it worse from my family as a kid, so I had a bank account now, so that didn't necessarily bother me. And then, quite accidentally, it turns out a few years later, around 1991, that Oliver Stone is going to do JFK. He's bought on the trail of the assassins for $50,000 from Jim Garrison. And I call Oliver's office, and, of course, they asked me to send over the tapes. And I said, no, you send over Oliver. But Oliver never came over, so I sold my house, got the funds, met a fellow named Lamar Cardin on my own, and with Lamar, made part one of the Garrison tapes. But my partner, Freddie Weintraub, who discovered Bruce Lee and who discovered brought Woodstock to Warner Brothers, said my film was going to be a political Woodstock, but he sold it to Cinemax before I could get a movie deal. I never got a movie deal after that. I never got Oscar consideration. So as you well know, part of my major drive in doing this movie, which cost me and my associate producer and associate writer Gino Minari, and I could not have finished this movie without Gino Minari if we put in thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to upgrade this so it could be shown in a theater. And 3 weeks ago, it's now up for an Oscar.
Fantastic.
Which thrills me. I don't think it has a chance, but you just never know. Something blessed, Sean, is going to happen to this movie.
I sure hope it does, John. You absolutely deserve it. Now, you mentioned that Jim Garrison had told you the name of the second Oswald. Do you recall what that name was?
No, it's written down somewhere. If you read Dick Russell's book, The Man Who Knew Too Much, he talks about a guy named Richard Case Nagel. He might have been one of them. There were 2 or 3 Oswalds.
Now, you also mentioned to me once that Jim Garrison told you the names of who he believed were the shooters. Do you remember any of those names?
No. As a matter of fact, he named the guy who was a government witness who murdered Tippit. But he was afraid of making it public because he would have been up for another lawsuit. But the one who can give you names of actual shooters, and you should have her as a guest, especially to talk about her book, Faustian Bargains, and that's Joan Mellon. Her book is about Lyndon Johnson, the vilest, most evil president that the United States has ever had. Her book is devastating, just devastating. But she names it in The Last Word on the Assassination, which you can also get on Amazon. It's 3 years old. That part of the panel at the end of the screening of the Garrison tapes, she names one of the shooters. But Garrison was right. It doesn't matter who the shooters are. It's the planners. That's who, and he solved that. He solved that, and the records are all there at the House Select Committee. They're at the Justice Department. They have access to all of that material. And in the film, Jimmy Carter says, if we get to the bottom of what happened to John Kennedy, we will get America right again. And then they tried to murder Carter. That's also shown in the film. And then he said afterwards, he said, I've lost control of my government. And it's true. And at one point on camera, I asked Mr. Garrison, do you think the president of the country runs the country? And one of the nice touches in the film, when I asked him, he's drinking a glass of water, he almost spits it out. And he says, I did before John Kennedy was killed. And then he goes on to explain why the president no longer runs the country. And the president does not run the country. I interviewed Sergeant Shriver in 1970, which was just 7 years after the murder and just 6 years after the Warren Report. And I asked Mr. Shriver, I said, what do you people who are bureaucrats and lifelong bureaucrats at the CIA or the post office or anywhere, what do you people think of the president of the United States? And he said they all look on him as a transitory civil servant. That's his exact quote. And that's 1970. Imagine how little these people think of the president now. They don't care if Barack Obama makes $12 million for his book. That is petty change to these people. They bought him off. I mean, he's a lawn jockey, for crying out loud, for the bankers, and he always has been. It just... There has been the only semi-decent president was Carter, but then he was shafted by Reagan. They made a deal with the Iranians to keep the hostages until after the election so Reagan could become president. And Lyndon Johnson is on record on the secret tapes talking about what a traitor Richard Nixon is, because Lyndon Johnson was finally trying to get a Paris peace treaty signed with the North Vietnamese, and Richard Nixon sent Mrs. Chenault, over to Vietnam to talk them out of not signing the Paris peace pacts until after the election when Nixon could get in. And this is on tape, and Johnson's actually calling him a traitor. He could have been shot and should have been shot. Most of these people in these high offices, as we point out in the film, Bush Senior. The code name for the operation at the Bay of Pigs was called Zapata, which was George Bush's oil company. One of the boats is called Barbour, his wife. The other is called the Houston. George Bush is the only man in America of that age who couldn't remember where he was when John Kennedy was shot, and there are photographs of him at Dealey Plaza making sure that he's shot. He is one of the people on the wanted poster that they should get before he croaks, okay? Because he knows, because he was in on it. Wouldn't it be wonderful if these people would sue me so we could get into a court of law and get the deposition? Well, they would never ever allow that to happen, ever.
Now, John, you're a man of action, as we've heard tonight and as we've seen throughout your years studying this case. Now, you've spoken out often against things like conferences, conventions, and generally talking about the story but not doing something. So if there's someone out there that wants to really do something, that maybe wants to get involved for the first time, how do you suggest they involve themselves in this case?
That is a perfect question, and there's the action that they can take, and the only action they can take, sadly, is to inform themselves. That's the first action that they could take. Inform themselves. Once you know that you live in an occupied country run by bankers, run by the military, and that you have no say. Voting in this country is totally meaningless. It's like I have General Motors stock, and I vote my stock, but I have no say as to the design of the car or how many miles a carburetor will get. I have nothing to say about it. You have nothing to say about your country. It's a fraud. It's not a democracy. Every sociologist in America has said for years we live in an oligarchy. It's not a democracy. So you can do one thing. First of all, you must inform yourself. Once you inform yourself, the actions you take are entirely your own. But the one action you don't take is following anything your government tells you to do if they want to send you to war. Don't go. Don't go. And you know, it's just been revealed that the Pentagon has been spending millions of dollars with major sporting events, especially the NFL, to have them honor soldiers on the field before the games begin. That is like Nazi Germany in the 30s. It is dreadful. It's all part of the propaganda. What it is they want you to do is they want you to raise cannon fodder for them. It's not their children they're sending because there's no more draft. That's how smart they are. There's no more draft. Also, there are no more jobs because NAFTA was signed by Bill Clinton. There is no more education. You've all been dumbed down. I screened this movie for a journalism major who is an anchor woman in Nevada. And at one point, she screamed in the film. When the film was over, I asked her, I said, Emily, how come you're screaming? There was no gunshot there. She said, John, I did not know that in 1963, a company could only own 5 stations in America. A major in journalism is not, she'd never heard of the fairness doctrine or the equal time provision. They never have heard about it. The most important thing that could happen in this country that would bring total change immediately is to rescind the Communications Act. Right now, 6 corporations own 95% of all American media. They should all be divested and reduced to only 5 stations. In 1970, there were 1,500 owners of independent television stations in this country. Now it no longer exists. You rescind the Communications Act, you will see a major revolution, an educational and political revolution in this country. That is it's more important than health care. It's more important than anything. People must be informed. You can't have a democracy, Jefferson said, unless the people are informed. And we're not informed. As Mark Twain said, we're misinformed, and that's the fake news that infests the media to this day, which is all over the American media and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And if you don't go and watch it for $1.99, then shame on you. Shame on you. You must see this film. I've made it inexpensive enough. I'm not a man of action at all, as Sean said. Indeed, I've never marched on the street to demonstrate, as angry as I got. I never threw a stone or shot a gun or anything like that. I am just a storyteller. But where I took action often was with my mouth. Because when I was on television and I got a chance to do commentaries, you heard a lot of this on the air if you lived in Los Angeles, California. And that's probably why I'm no longer on the air in Los Angeles, California, or any place else. But I got my little show here. That's good enough for me. And again, it allowed me to make my film. And Sean, you know, a lot of people say, well, do you miss making that kind of money? Do you miss being rich and famous? I'll tell you the 2 things I miss. I miss getting a seat in a great restaurant because I could walk into the most crowded place in L.A. Oh, Mr. Barbour, your seat's right over here. I never had to wait for anything. But most of all, I missed making people happy. When we left the show, we were getting 22,000 pieces of mail a week, and nearly everyone was a story. They wanted a Real People T-shirt, and this was a story they had about a neighbor or themselves or somebody else. People loved the show, and I made that show, and I made people happy, so that's what I miss. Now, on a smaller level, I'm making people happy, I guess, with the film and maybe with my little radio show, and that's enough for me. You know, I had my taste of glory, and it was meaningless. When I was when I had the #1 show in America for a couple of years, I never went to one of those parties. None of them, ever. I was so happy just being a father and doing my work and staying home. I love my son more than I love doing my show. The greatest days for me when I used to take him on junior golf tournaments, and he was the Caucasian Tiger Woods. He beat Phil Mickelson when he was 13. He shot a competitive 69. He won the Canadian National when he was 15. My son, we tried to get on the tour for 4 or 5 years, and he couldn't putt, but the greatest ball strike I ever saw. But his hobby was he kept a journal about his adventures as a golfer. Well, his hobby became his profession, and his profession became his hobby. He is now one of the writers and co-executive producers of Criminal Minds, which he did all on his own because his poor father had all the burned bridges before and after him, could never help my son, and he did it on his own. So I'm enormously proud of him. And his profession is now his hobby. Every Sunday he goes out and plays golf and shoots par golf. So there you go. So I've been blessed, and I've been enormously lucky. And now there's a possibility that my book might be published in the next 6 months. It's called Your Mother's Not a Virgin. And is that a great title?
That's fantastic, John.
You know how it came about?
How?
Again, by accident. When I was booking Garrison on the morning show, and I called him and told him that he would be a guest on the show. It's live. We're going to have phone calls. And he kept saying he'd never get away with it. But when finally he agreed to do the show, out of the blue, he says to me, John, that recent Harris poll, it's 1970. He says, 83% of all Americans do not believe Oswald acted alone or even did it. And I said, you're kidding, that many? Yeah. He said, but get this, only 23% want a new investigation. He says, what does that tell you about us as people? Right. Without missing a beat, I said, Mr. Garrison, I know what my mother and father did on the pool table or in the alley or in the rumble seat of the car, but don't ever tell me my mother's not a virgin. And he howled. He said, can I quote you? I said, certainly you can quote me. Well, he never did quote me that I know of, but when I got to writing the book, I thought that's the title, and I'm dealing with an agent who is a fellow Canadian. He was a former executive at Random House, and he said it's the greatest title of any book he's ever had, and he's had 6 bestsellers because everybody's had a mother, and they're going to be offended. They see that title, it says, Your Mother's Not a Virgin. They're going to pick it up. Absolutely. They're just going to pick it up. So anyway, that's what's next. I don't know what it is that I will do as far as doing a film or whatever. I've often thought of doing a one-man show based on the title of the book, Your Mother's Not a Virgin, but I would have to wait till after the book comes out. So you're not going to speak at any of the conferences this November? I doubt it. G.D. Baker's been after me to come and do it again this November. The very first time I did it 3 years ago, I said, this is all a waste of time. And I told the audience that, and they cheered. But they came back the next year. And the only reason I went last year, I didn't want to go last year, but I had the first edit of the film. And I wanted to screen it at the Texas Theater. And so that's why I went there. And, and 90% of the people weren't even born who were in the audience, as you can testify, and there was a spontaneous standing ovation. I got a half a dozen standing ovations in L.A. and New York, and And Mark Crispin Miller, who was a really bright professor of media back in New York, he brought his whole family of 6 people. And after the film, he stood up and he lectured the audience. He said, this film cannot be just seen once. You're going to have to watch this a half a dozen times. There's so much great stuff in it. Well, as you and I speak, he is screening it for a bunch of Chinese media students from China. So I'm curious to see what they're going to say about that. You know, the film should be in every library. It should be in every college. And I don't have the capacity to, market that. I'm not a salesman. I don't know how to do that stuff. But somebody is going to come along and just say, hey, John, let me help you do that. And that's how that will happen. I just tell the story and put it out there. And it speaks for itself. And this movie speaks loud and clear about the truth of where we are in America today.
John, if someone wants to go watch the American media in the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy, or if someone wants to hear John Barbour's World, your show, how would they do that?
Well, all they have to do is go to Amazon and they just search the American media in the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and it's $1.99 to stream, and it's $4.99 to own. My show, if you go to BBS Radio, John Barbour's World, the archives are there, and some of the guests that I've had were absolutely phenomenal. James Corbett a week ago, David Paulides today. I had Norman Lear on a couple of months ago. I've had Ed Asner. I've had a lot of really fabulously interesting guests. And I do the show every second Monday because I don't want to work that hard. I have a great producer. I would never do it unless Mike Kim helped me produce the show. And I've never met Mike Kim. He just is a huge fan who talked me into doing this. He's the one that gets these great guests for me. The reason I like to do it, Sean, is one thing that I like my mind. My favorite book right now about anybody in show business is called The Child of the Century, the autobiography of Ben Hecht, who was America's highest paid screenwriter, and he became the first propagandist for the state of Israel. What a great, great story. What an unbelievably great, great book. And he he was a famous columnist and playwright, and he wrote his book like it's a series of articles. So every couple of pages is a new headline and a new article. That's how I wrote my book. So if you wanted to learn something about Cesar Chavez or Muhammad Ali or Bob Hope or people you never heard of before but are great stories, you can open the book any place and you'll have 2 or 3 pages of an unbelievable read. So that's how my book's designed. And in his book, he said, a writer is like a beautiful woman who is naked. A beautiful woman who is naked stands in front of the mirror and admires her body. A good writer looks on the page and admires his words. And that's how I feel about writing. I do not know what is going to come out of my head at any time. And I remember when my son, you could Google this if you want it. You could Google on YouTube, John Barbour speaks at his son's wedding. 8 years ago, my son called me. He said, Dad, I'm getting married at the Henry Ford Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, and I'd love you to come and speak. And I said, son, I haven't done this for years. I don't want to speak. He said, I don't care. He said, you're my father, and I want you to speak. I said, I haven't done this in years. You're going to speak, Dad. I said, okay. So I hung up. In 8 minutes, I wrote 10 minutes of material. It just flowed out of me and never looked at it for another 8 months until he got married. Then I looked at it the night before. I memorized, and I got up and I did it. And the reception from the 200 or 300 people who were there was just amazing. That's how I write. You could tell me anything. I mean, I remember Woody Allen saying, I only use 1 out of every 10 jokes that I write. I use 9 out of every 10 jokes that I write because that's something that just comes naturally. To me, it's like blue eyes. I have no control over it, okay? Like sometimes I have no control over my mouth either. It just, those things happen. Anyway, Sean, I'm really pleased that you got this show.
Thank you very much.
I'm also pleased that you have Brian Lloyd working with you. He is He is fabulous.
He's
he made massive contributions, media contributions to the film, which is called The American Media, and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Yes.
If I haven't said that 20 times for you already. And he's got a really good heart, that man. Even though sometimes he's had a couple of heart operations, they can't take away the spirit in that heart. So I'm glad that Brian is working with you.
Yes, I can't tell you how excited we are for Brian Lloyd to be on board. He'll be on board more often on the show as well as on the site. So yes, we're all very excited about that, believe me. Hey, John, thank you so much for doing this tonight. Really, it means a lot.
Oh, listen, John, it was my pleasure, and I hope we do this again. And not necessarily talk about assassinations. I can just tell you a bunch of great show business stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And John, I never got to ask you about doing the pilot of the Gong Show, so we must do that at some point.
Wait a second. The Gong Show. I remember one night, I do Rentz's show once a month. It's the fourth Friday in every month. And one night, I come on in the third hour. In the first 2 hours, oh, God, it was a dreadful bore. And I told Jeff on the air, I said, I was waiting for the light at the end of the tunnel, but the dark tunnel kept getting darker and longer. I said, I'm going to bring you some light. So I said to Jeff, listen, do you ever buy an audiobook? He says, yeah, because often that's the only way I can read it. I said, okay, you be quiet for a while. I'm going to take out, because Chuck Barris had just died. And everybody was asking me, is it true you were the first host of the Gong Show? And I have that chapter in my book. So I told Jeff, you just be quiet, okay? And I am going to read to you the chapter from the Gong Show. So I did. Anyway, my son came up to visit that weekend, and he's driving home, and he heard this from his mother that I had rented. And he said, Dad, can I have the link? And I said, yeah, certainly. So he said he listened to it on the way back to Los Angeles and called me to tell me how much he loved it. So if I can find that link, I will forward you that link so you can listen to it or post it. I don't care. And when I get off, I will email you if you haven't already got it, do you have the link to the Amazon site?
Yes, we have it, and it's on the site.
Oh, good. Then you put that up?
Absolutely.
And I will talk to you shortly. And Sean, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You are just a terrific fellow. And give my best to Brian when you talk to him.
I absolutely will, John. Thanks again. This has been John Barbour, the producer of The American Media and the second assassination of President John F. Kennedy. You can find it on Amazon.com via special link on MidnightRiderNews.com. And he enthralled us for 3 days in Dallas last November, and he was, as usual, a master storyteller again tonight. That was John Barbour. I'm S.T. Patrick, and I'll be back with a tribute to the late Jim Mars. I'm very proud of where this show has been. I'm very proud of where it's headed, and I'm very proud of where it can go at its best. Midnight Rider News was and is a dream project for me. Let me assure you, however, that there may not have been a Midnight Rider News without the work of Jim Mars and Art Bell. I first bought Crossfire, the plot to kill Kennedy, upon the release of Oliver Stone's JFK. It was instantly my favorite movie, and it's retained that title since. When I first saw that film was based on the works of Jim Mars and Jim Garrison, I ran to the nearest bookstore and I purchased both. When Larry King left his late-night talk show in the early 90s, my local AM station then picked up Coast to Coast AM, hosted by Art Bell. Upon first listen, Art was difficult to take. It was not how I had been taught, and he was not discussing topics that dominated both my newspapers and my textbooks. I can remember that I had favorite guests on the show very early. There was John Lear, there was Graham Hancock, and there was Jim Mars. Later, Coast to Coast AM would be the first place I heard Alex Jones, Peter Levenda, Joseph Farrell, Peter Lance, John Barbour, Steve Quayle, and gosh, so many others. However, my favorite topic of discussion had by then for years been the JFK assassination, and for someone who was in college in the early 90s, Jim Marrs was the guy on the topic. Man, I soaked up everything like a sponge. When Napster ruled the world, I began downloading every file I could with the name Jim Marrs in it. When Coast to Coast finally began offering its archives, I instantly subscribed just to get the Jim Marrs episodes. Now, bear in mind that at that time, I was a stereotypical Alex P. Keaton young Republican, down to the perfect part in my hair. Jim Marrs was instrumental in opening my eyes, my mind, and my heart to a world that I'd never seen, to the world of truth. And I was changed forever. When someone says, hey, what's a good starting book on such and such topic? If Jim Marrs has done work on that topic, I always suggest him. Crossfire is maybe the best starting book for the JFK assassination. Alien Agenda is the world's best-selling nonfiction book on the UFOs and the paranormal. The Terror Conspiracy makes a multifaceted and often complex 9/11 story so easy to understand. Rule by Secrecy should be the side-by-side reading to every sophomore world history text. Rise of the Fourth Reich is an amazing look at the post-war World War II era. Trillion-Dollar Conspiracy and Population Control are chilling snapshots of where we are today. His other books are important as well. I went to the JFK Assassination Conference in Dallas in 2016 in large part to see Jim Marrs for the first time. I never would have thought that it would also be the last. He gave an amazing speech and was very kind afterwards. It's an experience I'll never forget. Jim Marrs was instrumental in changing my life. I don't think that's an overstatement, and I do not believe that I am alone. Jim Marrs, December 5th, 1943, August 2nd, 2017. From the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight. Rest in peace, Jim Marrs.